Welcome to the 46th Clifden Arts Festival. My name is Des Lally. We are very fortunate to welcome the renowned actor, author and theatre historian Simon Callow to the Clifden Festival. Simon had a chance encounter with the great Irish/English actor Micheál Mac Liammóir in 1966. Micheál Mac Liammóir was a towering force in Irish theatre in the first half of the 20th century. He was co-founder of the Gate Theatre and the Thaibhneach Theatre. Micheál Mac Liammóir had a profound influence on Simon Callow, as he illustrates in his amazing autobiography, My Life in Pieces. He recounts stories of their interactions and of how Mac Liammóir, as a man, an actor, a writer, and a man of the theatre, influenced Callow in his life in the theatre. So, ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome Simon Callow. Simon Callow, welcome to the 46th Clifden Arts Festival, which was founded in 1977. Yeah. And we're talking to you from Connemara on the far west of Ireland. And I suppose Seamus Heaney called it a place of captivating brightness. Was one phrase that he had from a poem he wrote about Connemara. And in a sense also, it has been a place where people visit, where people come to experience what some people refer to as the real Ireland. It's our reality, but many people did. One of whom we're going to talk about today, and this man has crossed both our lives, Simon, in strange ways, but in your particular case in a very marked way. And in your marvellous alternative autobiography, as you refer to it, My Life in Pieces, you refer to this man as the man who changed my life. And that man was Micheál Mac Liammóir. And what I'd love to talk to you this morning about, Simon, is how he changed your life and how you first came across him. So I'll hand over to you, Simon, and maybe I might come in now and then, but as I say, the floor is yours.
Well, yes, Michael did create a disturbance in my life when I met him. You should know that I was a student at Queen's University in Belfast, and I'd gone there for one reason and one reason only, which was to act. I had no interest whatever in becoming academically qualified, but I'd been working at the National Theatre at the Old Vic, then run by Laurence Olivier, and for a year I worked in the box office there, and I fell in love with the whole notion of the theatre and got to meet actors and understood something of the work that they do. And for some reason, I thought it wasn't appropriate that I should go to drama school. I thought, or become an amateur actor. What I thought I'd do was to go to university and pick it up as I went along. In my innocence, I thought that was what I would be doing. And so I went to Queen's University, and indeed I did start acting with the Drama Society, the Dramsoc as it was called, and was electrified to hear, after I'd been there for half a term, that the Irish University Drama Association contest would be held in Belfast, and that it would be judged by no less a person than Micheál Mac Liammóir. Now, I knew who Mac Liammóir was because I'd got hold of the records that he made, the wonderful records he made of the importance of being Oscar. Absolutely, and I see them now in my mind's eye, gold and Beardsley in Michael's manner as a designer, as an artist. And I boldly went to the organizers of the festival, and I said that I very much, no, I didn't. What I did actually was to go to the university newspaper, which is called Gown or Gown, as we prefer to call it in and to adjudicate. And we need to make a fuss of him. We need to make sure that everybody knows that he's coming. And I would like to propose that I go down to his house in Dublin and interview him. And I'd never interviewed anybody in my life. I didn't know what on earth I was doing, but I just wanted to meet Micheál Mac Liammóir because I'd been sort of overwhelmed by those recordings. I was passionately fascinated by Oscar Wilde anyway, as a young gay boy, young man. Of course, he was a sort of the patron saint of homosexuality at that time. And I read everything, I mean, everything, not only by Oscar Wilde, but everything about Oscar Wilde. I'd gone all the way through the great biography, Richard, what's his name?
Elliman.
Elman, that's right, Richard Elman, and I'd read all the letters which had recently come out. I'd read 4-5 biographies of Wilde and was completely captivated by him. But when I heard Micheál Mac Liammóir's recording, I understood Oscar Wilde in a completely different sense. He somehow encapsulated and personified the extraordinary combination of intellectual daring and dandyism and a sort of haunted poetry within himself. Micheál Mac Liammóir embodied that within himself. That voice, once heard, is very hard to forget. The richness, fullness of tone, delicacy of touch, and a kind of, well, just an extraordinary poetry about it. And
so it was the voice, Simon, that brought you in.
It was the voice, but that was all that I knew. I'd never seen him in any other form. So, of course, yes, it was. And I read his own introduction, I think, to the play suggests, I'll mispronounce this Irish word, but that he was a shanachi, or is that right?
Yes,
a storyteller. A storyteller. And so but then I of course went to read his autobiography, or for Hecuba, and that's an intoxicating read as well for a young man like myself. I was 19. I was 19 when I met him. I was very, very stage struck. And remember that I had been working at the National Theatre for Laurence Olivier, and there was Laurence Olivier, who was certainly a sensational phenomenon and presence himself. But what Micheál, as I discovered, because of his extraordinary, the longevity of his career was something quite extraordinary, that he had acted as a boy actor in the London theatre, playing Oliver Twist to Beerbohm Tree's Fagin, was already made my heart beat faster, because I was immersed in theatrical history as well. It's a very strange, because I don't know why, but I didn't really, until very late in the day, think that I might become an actor. I was just completely and totally stage struck and aware of theatrical history. I knew about Irving, I knew about Tree, I knew about Garrick, I knew about the Elizabethan theatre. I was, it sounds boastful, but I was extraordinarily, profoundly engaged with the history of acting particularly, but also the theatre in general. And I knew
Mac Liammóir was a direct link to Beerbohm Tree and to,
well, I mean, to another
Sarah
world.
Bernhardt.
Yes, exactly. To these things that I'd read about, but there, and indeed heard the odd recordings of Beerbohm Tree, and even there's a crackly thing of Irving and a couple of other of their contemporaries, but they seemed a bit remote, to be honest, because they were on, by LPs and not very well transferred and so on. But when I heard Mac Liammóir, I was transported into another world of theatrical expression, which was nothing like real life, I have to say. There was nothing realistic about what Micheál was doing. It was art. It was an incredibly cultivated art. His sense of rhythm, his sense of just sound itself, his ability to evoke worlds of expression. All of this I got from the LP. So I told them, that the editors of Gowan, that I had to be sent down to Dublin with a tape recorder and talk to Micheál Mac Liammóir. And amazingly enough, he agreed to this, not knowing, student journalist as he might have thought I was. And so I betook myself to Dublin. It was the first time I'd ever seen Dublin, and that was pretty intoxicating too, because remember, as I say, this was 1969, and Dublin was in a pretty shabby state at that time, but absolutely mythic. I mean, as it crumbled, as it was crumbling before one's very eyes, it embodied something, that extraordinary combination of elements, the Celtic world encountering British 18th century architecture and then 19th century architecture in an incredibly heady combination. But this strange sense of all the paint work was peeling everywhere. Everything was crumbling, but it had an extraordinary beauty, which I didn't see again in a city until I first visited Trieste. And that had exactly the same thing. This was extraordinary richness and decline about it. But it was very powerful. And of course, I went first to Oscar Wilde's house, the Wilde family house, and to where Shaw lived, and all of this. I went around before I finally found myself at Harcourt Terrace. And
Simon, can you tell me, you're at the door of number 4 Harcourt Terrace.
Yeah.
What are your memories of the house as you went in? Can you?
Well, the house was another thing again altogether, which I had never seen anything like, that sort of fin de siècle world, which Micheál and Hilton had made in Dublin. It too was, as you opened the door, just as when I'd put on the records, I was transported into another world. So I was transported into another world, which I had never seen anything like that at that time. And there were, reproductions of Beardsley everywhere, and then Michael's own Beardsley-esque theatre designs and so on. And it was full of wonderfully recently plumped up cushions and chaise longues and things like that I'd never really seen in my life. I'd seen pictures of them, sort of, but I was ushered into a kind of temple of art, which was at the same time rather sexy. There was this interesting combination of course, I knew that Micheál and Hilton were lovers. That was a very open secret in Dublin, and all those funny jokes about, oh yes, Micheál Mac Liammóir, he's up to his Hilton Edwards and all of that kind of slightly louche speculation about them. But it was very, very homosexual, the environment, and very the art on the walls was very high camp, very, very high camp. And I met Brian Tobin, who was Michael's manager and sometime lover. I didn't meet Hilton on that occasion, Brian was incredibly tough with me. So don't waste Mr. Mac Liammoir's time. He'll give you exactly 1 hour, and there's all that kind of stuff, which was a bit intimidating in a way. And here I was with this vast tape recorder. I mean, such an old Grundig. I mean, it was as heavy as I was, and I lugged it up the stairs, and I sat there waiting for Michael, and then in came Michael, and it was a totally theatrical entrance. And I noted what everybody had told me I would be aware of, which is that he was wearing full makeup and an extremely dubious toupee, a cheap toupee, which only occasionally adhered to his skull. It sort of wobbled about a bit. But although, in a way, that was a sort of comic impression at first, it was also completely spellbinding and intoxicating. I instantly fell under his spell. The voice, of course, immediately, but the charm and the wit, the graciousness, and completely unpatronizing. He treated me absolutely as an equal, which is astonishing. As I say, it was a 19-year-old English boy who knew. Well, the good thing about me was that I knew all his references. I knew everything. When he talked about Sarah Bernhardt, I knew, of course, who was. When he talked about Anu McMaster, I knew who that was. I knew everything about him, really. So that sort of relaxed him, I should think, quite a bit. And what followed was just a constant, mellifluous, articulate, elegant, and then quite risque torrent of conversation, well, monologue, to be honest, with occasional interventions by me, but it was generous. That was the great feeling that I had about it, that this man was generously allowing me to into his house and into his soul, in a way. And this was unusual. As I say, I'd been at the Old Vic. I'd met lots of famous actors there, John Gielgud and Olivier, of course, most famous of all. But funnily enough, they were off stage. They were a bit more subdued, whereas Michael was, as it were, always on stage.
That's what intrigues me, Simon. When you mention these figures, the Gielguds, the Richardsons, the Oliviers, etc., these giants of theatre in England, and yet you say that it's Mac Liammóir. Some would say down the league table of actors in comparison to those other gentlemen, and this is the man who you say changed your life.
Yes, and I put it that way. It changed my life as opposed to it changed my understanding of acting. I mean, because he was in such a different category. It was as if he was practicing a different art to the art of Olivier, Richardson, Redgrave, Gielgud, all of those, Ashcroft, all those extraordinary actors that I was lucky enough to see and to meet, I mean, glancingly. What I found about Michael was that he lived theatre in every minute of his life, that he converted everything into theatre. The simplest conversation became a dialogue of fascination and charm. And it gave me a sense of what I've always felt about acting, that we very much like to think that the best kind of acting is one where you recognize a pattern of behavior that you know from your own life or from what you've seen. But Michael was about something completely different. He was more in the sort of territory of Charles Lawton, another great hero of mine, in that his performances, but indeed his persona, was a creation in itself. There was no question about that. There was no pretense that he was like other mortals. And I felt then, I felt that I was in touch with something absolutely almost primitive in that the actors at Delphi would have known what Michael was up to, which was just a breadth and a scale and a completely through-conceived personality. Now, you know, of course, in those days, one knew nothing at all about the reality of his birth and upbringing in London. In those days, of course, one bought the story that he told in All for Hecuba. Absolutely, one thought that he was from Cork. But
did you, in meeting him, Simon, did you get a sense of Irishness of this Celtic mysticism that he had steeped himself in, and that world? Was he, and sometimes I think this sometimes is missed with Mac Liammóir, that he was such a mix of the great art forms of Europe and the world, and funneled into his invented Irishness.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, I was at that age in no position to judge his, as it were, performance in life. I just thought, I knew always in the back of my mind that wherever he was born, you know, and as I say, I didn't question the fact that he was supposed to be born in Cork, but that as a boy, he'd worked in that extraordinary pre-First World War theatre with its incredible fullness and richness of staging and so on, and vastness of personalities, you know. Whether he was Irish or, well, of course, I assumed totally that he was purely Irish and that what I was seeing was just, as you say, a Gaelic or a Celtic phenomenon. On the other hand, I was aware that it was not of this age. It was absolutely and definitely from another period in time. He was a survivor or a remnant of another world. But what so shook me was that it was so expressive, very expressive. Many an actor in England, those great ones that I've mentioned, including John Gielgud and Ralph and Sir Lawrence, who were all, of course, massive personalities, but they kind of in off stage, they had a kind of nice undercutting of their theatricality. I think Sir Donald Wolfett, who was extraordinarily enough a great friend of Mac Liammóir's and Edwards's, I say extraordinarily because John Gielgud was obsessed by the fact that he thought Wolfett was homophobic, but there can be no question about it. He stayed with Michael and Hilton in their house. He must have known absolutely what their domestic arrangement was, but he endorsed them, he admired them, and they admired him. So Donald Wolfett, again, this is what I mean about why it sort of changed my life, is that I thought, MacMaster's another example, whom I never saw, alas, and have only heard on records, but there's the same harking back to something much more primitive. Now, Wolfett, of course, was a tragedian, and I don't think Michael was a tragedian as such, but I think that they went back to this ancient art of storytelling. And I've always felt, I felt from then, and this is one of the things that I absorbed from Mac Liammóir, is that the art of the theatre is above all the art of storytelling.
Mhm.
It's not a reproduction of life. It's the unfolding of a tale in the most expressive way possible. And I got from this encounter with Micheál a sense of the depth and richness of expression coming out of not just a technical approach to your art, but out of your very being.
Mm.
But
Well, Simon, his gift as a linguist and his ear for language, many languages, French, of course, Spanish, Italian, all the languages he spoke. He was a kind of a linguistic sponge, and in particularly the Irish language.
Yeah.
That in his, as you say, and as you so beautifully pronounced, his Shanachie mode. He immersed himself in that great storytelling tradition of Ireland, but also the beauty and the cadences and musicality of language.
Yeah.
And so when he went to perform in Belfast in '69, you had written the article, the interview up for the magazine, and he arrived up in Belfast. But before you go on to that, how did you say goodbye when you left? When you finished the interview with them, you must have left that house on a high.
I certainly did.
Floating.
I certainly did, and also I knew that I'd had a wonderful interview. It was, I mean, everything was perfectly quotable, and as I said, he did me the sort of honor, as it were, of treating me like a contemporary of his, and so he was pretty risque. I mean, that thing about he said, of course, I've been as an artist. He said, as a painter, I've been terribly over-influenced by Beardsley. Now you see up there, there's a picture. I've read the most ridiculous book by a woman called Bridget Brophy about Beardsley, and you see here. She says it's Salome holding her fingers together, and Brophy says this is the penis. He says, well, I've seen a lot of penises in my life, and this doesn't resemble anything that I've ever seen. Well,
while you're there, I'm just going to hold up this book. See it?
Yeah, indeed. Oh, yes.
And as I open it onto the first page, I don't know whether you can see that inscription there, Simon.
Micheál, for his birthday, 25th of October, love from Hilton, 1930. Yeah.
And I came across that in a bookshop. So Beardsley was such an important part of the life.
Oh, vital. And I think he's right. He was over-influenced as a designer and as a painter by Beardsley. I have a picture. This was given to me by Pat McClarnon, who was in Micheál's company and who indeed played Dorian Gray when Micheál. But now
it's beautiful.
Tiny, but it's the very first theatre design that Micheál ever did, and this is for Faust, which was the first show they did.
Beautiful. 28.
Wonderful thing. But it is pure Beardsley in a way. I mean, it doesn't pretend to be anything else. You know, what's it like being on your own on the stage? And she said, well, you know, when I played Hamlet, I always used to think when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern left the stage, I said, now I am alone. I just think, thank God those balls have gone. So it was a sort of candid idea that, which, you know, and of course, well, maybe we'll get onto that in a second. But no, you asked the question, how did I leave? Well, I left in slightly interested. He said, well, he had to go to do something, and thank you, and Brian would see me out. So when Brian came to me, bearded, amazingly handsome and forceful figure that he was, I said, now, I know this is a little bit cheeky of me, but I've just created a show called Fin de siècle, which we've done in Belfast. And it really centers on a reading of Salome, but it's in a country house, and all these devotees of fin de siècle literature are kind of showing off what they know and so on. But in the second part of the show, it all turns rather grim, and the girl who plays Salome, they kill. So I was 18 when I created this rather ghoulish piece of theatre. I said, but the great thing is that there's a part in this thing for the narrator, and the part of the narrator, which I wrote for myself, of course, is extremely powerful. Now, I wonder, could we persuade Mr. Mac Liammóir to read the part of the narrator, and we would revive the show for him? And Brian just shouted at me. He said, "How dare you think that Micheál Mac Liammóir would be in your little show? He's a very busy man. He's a very, very great actor. Don't dare to talk to me about it." I was absolutely singed by that. So I suppose when I did then, anyway, I came back to Belfast. I applied myself to this massive Grundig machine, and as I said in my book and elsewhere, in the end I was up against a deadline, and I just couldn't literally transcribe everything. So I sort of did it from memory, more or less, and then I sent a copy of it to Mac Liammóir, and he wrote back and said, I'd actually made up quite a lot, but Michael said, "It's a most wonderful interview, the first truly accurate interview I've ever had received," which I'm afraid it wasn't. But anyway.
It's very ironic because, I mean, his own style, what do you believe, what do you not believe? So, I mean,
yes, great.
It followed in that train. So yeah. He was coming up then to do the show, to do the importance.
So he came up to do the show, and I went to the organizers of the festival, and I said, I know that Mr. Mac Liammóir has trouble with his eyesight. He'll need an amanuensis, and also possibly a dresser. So I said, I'd like to put myself forward for that. And so they said, well, of course, that makes sense. You've met him and so on. He'll trust you and so on. And then that was just a week he was in Belfast. And I was at his side all the time, except when I was actually performing in the Seagull, which the Drama Society was doing. And I was playing Trigorin in it. And that was our entry into the competition. But mostly I went with him to the shows. And then we'd have a cup of tea in his hotel, and he'd dictate his comments on the event. And but he used to sit in front of his mirror, looking as he gave the comments, looking at himself in the mirror and making satirical observations about himself, like my wonderful black hair, every hair of it my own, of course it is, well, and all this kind. It was just an extraordinary time, and it was almost, I suppose, a bit like Ronald Harwood's play The Dresser. I was his stooge and his support. And then when he did the show twice. And when I did the show and was there backstage with him, and had to learn these things which he taught me to do with it. I had to iron his shirt, and I'd never ironed a shirt before. And so then he told me how to pack everything up and how to unpack everything and so on. And he was in the highest of high spirits and sort of camping around a bit and wearing these red fishnet underpants, and I ventured to. He said, "Oh, yes, like a fishing net," and I said, "Well, what a catch!" He thought that was quite funny, and he asked me questions about myself, about my sexuality, about my life, and so on, and it was very intimate. But then, as the time for the show approached, he became quieter. And it wasn't that he was gathering himself for the show, it was that he started to fear. And the fear gripped him, and it really gripped him. And I gave him his, I told him when it was the quarter hour, when it was the 5, and all the rest of it. And he became rigid with fear. And this was shocking to me. I had no idea. I'd never been backstage with a professional actor before. And I assumed that the gods that I had worked with at the National Theatre just swept onto the stage ablaze with self-confidence. This was a real revelation to me, that it could be frightening to go on stage. And so we went, and he'd given me strict instructions as to what to do. I had to take him down the corridor, up the steps, and then push him on the stage, onto the stage. And as we went down the corridor, he held my hand so tight that it was painful. And with the other hand, he was crossing himself. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, save me. And I don't know that Michael was particularly a Christian. I think he veered towards Buddhism. And indeed, I heard him say I think on an interview that he saw life as just a dress rehearsal for a performance which would occur in another sphere altogether. But he was, the terror was something extraordinary. And then I push him on stage, and then he'd speak the first lines of The Importance of Being Oscar with such ease and consummate skill of storytelling, drawing everybody in. And then again, so I'd run round to the front to watch this astonishing performance. And it was astonishing. It was he achieved a degree of intimacy with an audience such as I've never really seen any other actor achieve so effortlessly. Everybody was eating out of his hand instantly. And I discovered then something very interesting, which was that because of his persona, and these people in the audience were not sophisticated people. They were mostly farmers, quite rich farmers, but from beyond the city. And they had a sort of sense of Mac Liammóir as this kind of terrifically distinguished and famous person, of a great actor. There was I don't think they had any sense that he was exotic in any way. They just thought he was a great actor. And from those very first few lines of The Importance of Being Oscar, he flattered them into becoming very sophisticated people. He treated them as if they were very sophisticated. And I understood this great rule, which is the job of an actor is not to make the audience laugh, it's to make them witty. He transformed that audience. That audience became incredibly aware of nuance and were laughing at things that I think possibly they didn't understand, but he'd made them feel that they did. And it was wonderful. And they came backstage and they said, "Mr. Mac Liammóir, what a wonderful performance. Thank you. I followed you over the years," and all of this kind of thing. And he was incredibly charming with them, incredibly warm and generous. And in the case of people he'd met before, he remembered them. He remembered a couple of people, and they were glowed with pleasure. He was...
He loved Belfast audiences because the gate had gone up there during the war, and he loved going to Belfast.
Well, rightly so, because Belfast audiences are wonderful. And I was fascinated to discover that Dickens, who did reading tours there on a couple of occasions, said that the Belfast audience was the best audience in the British Isles. And that's a bit of a slap in the face for Dublin, I must say. But Dublin's a very critical audience. Dublin's a very, come on, show me audience. Whereas Belfast is just welcoming because they feel a bit neglected for the most part. And they really just grew under his generosity of performance. They just expanded into the most wonderful audience anybody could ever have. It's fantastic. That was a an astonishing thing. But to go right back to the question you asked me at the beginning, the way he changed my life was that I think I understood from him something that I hadn't quite got from these other great ones that I'd seen, was the continuum of acting, going back and back and back, right back to Roscius in Rome and the great, actors of the Greek theatre, that there's a sort of cord, an umbilical cord in a sense, binding us all together. And that the theatre is a place where audiences are opened up into some other possibilities of life, of thought, of wit, and all of that. I mean, Laurence Olivier said in his maiden speech, indeed his only speech in the House of Lords, the theatre is the first glamorizer of thought. But that wasn't Michael's approach. I mean, that's very true of Olivier, that he sort of dramatized thought, not so much thought in the philosophical sense, but opposite positions. He could very good at dramatizing that. Whereas Michael, the poet, the great poet in the theatre, was enriching life itself and our understanding of life. He was casting a spell, always casting a spell. And I never saw Michael do anything on stage apart from the importance of being Oscar. And I'm sure that he was variable as an actor from everything everybody says. And like his brother-in-law, MacMaster, he had very good days and not such good days. It varied a bit. But when he was on song, he was an absolute magician in the theatre. And alas, there's not much of him on film that you would particularly want to refer to. Although I do think his Iago is a remarkable achievement in Wells's famous film. But that too...
you're again, coming back to the Connemara connection, there's a marvellous photograph taken about 6 miles out the road here of a young man in a donkey and cart. And we've identified it outside the Leenan Hotel. Yeah. The Leenan Hotel is still there. And of course, it's Orson Welles.
Right.
And a woman came into the office here recently and said, sure, my grandfather bought the donkey on him from him when he was going back to Dublin. But anyway, whether that's true or not, Welles was here in 30.
Yeah.
And I know that Welles is also a great hero of yours. And in many ways, I think they were so similar. I mean, when Mac Liammóir was 17 years of age, he was heading off, or 18 years of age, heading off to Europe on a painting holiday. And they were gifted geniuses in so many different fields, both men.
Yeah.
So do you think when both men met that maybe Welles recognised a kindred spirit in Michael? More than Hilton?
He always said that Hilton was the person that he could relate to best. Because Hilton was a father figure in many ways. And I think did help to shape Orson in theatrical knowledge, apart from anything else. He taught him how to light a show and all of that. But it's true that there's something, there is a parallel between Orson and Michael, certainly in the obvious sense that they were both very gifted as draftsmen, and had a tremendous sense of their tremendous eye. Both of them had the most wonderful eye. And it's also true that Orson, not quite in the way that Michael did, but Orson sort of invented himself. That's to say, he created a myth around himself. And he as it were, became the person that he should be. It's almost like in the way that Michael did. He didn't want to be Alfred Wilmore, boy actor from Willesden. He wanted to be the Shanachie, he really did. And Orson was a Shanachie in a way too, the wonderful storyteller and a wonderful charismatic individual. But increasingly, Michael came to be very suspicious of Wells. He was even suspicious of Wells at the gate. He had the feeling that Orson was drawing, in particularly in Jew Zeus,
because their long relationship had such dips and highs, and
it really did.
Financial pressures and
terrible, and Michael felt very betrayed by Orson in many ways, and was angry. Was just very angry with him. I don't think he ever really reconciled with him, whereas Hilton did, and Hilton forgave everything. And there are beautiful letters from Hilton to Orson about Michael when Michael had died, about the loss, the terrible, impossible to repair loss of Michael. But
I was at I went into University Church in '78 to see his coffin, Michael's coffin, and of course there was the most beautiful wreath from Orson on the coffin, along with James Mason and many others.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I remember seeing it. Yeah.
I mean, Orson wrote Hilton a most wonderful letter about Michael. But so he knew what they were and what they were worth, and but Michael could be quite witchy, and I think he intuitively sensed that Wells was going to exploit them in some way, and he did, to some extent, exploit them. And Michael was fiercely protective of Hilton. I mean, and felt that Hilton was an easy touch in some ways. But on the other hand, I think we have to say, particularly in Put Money in Thy Purse, but also in Each Actor on His Ass, he presents the most wonderful portrait of Wells. I mean, Michael was just a wizard with words as well. I mean, the books are, I think, really wonderful. They all are, right up to Enter a Goldfish and all of that. They're wonderful, and the plays are really good. Michael's plays they're not masterpieces, but they're wonderful pieces of theatre. And I wish that people would think of reviving them, but I suppose they never will. Ill Met by Moonlight, things like that. They're rather wonderful. Well,
they certainly. I mean, when he did write his plays, particularly Ill Met by Moonlight, it saved. The audiences were very good, and it helped a never and always struggling Gate theatre survive. And I think he also he had that huge need constantly to keep creating, whether it be paintings, drawings, his writings, his acting, his set designing. I mean, his energies as a creator were phenomenal in so many different disciplines.
Well, that he shares with Wells. This something they both had. Orson Welles, I don't think, although Orson Welles did give a number of wonderful performances on film, particularly, of course I didn't see him in the theatre, but I think Welles was always remote from his inner life as an actor. He was a wonderful externalizer, whereas Michael, I say this witchy thing, but I'd like to put it in a different way, that his intuitive self was so extraordinary that he was able to channel things so that, I mean, I of course, again, I'm only speaking of the importance of being Oscar, but the way he inhabited those different characters was simply wonderful. I mean, and of course, that's another sense in which he sort of influenced my life, because my whole trajectory as a performer of one-person plays is entirely due to Michael. And when I was asked in the 90s by Brian Brolly to, in fact, I'd been asked by a couple of people, Noel Purcell and others asked me to do The Importance of Being Oscar, and I said, never, I couldn't come anywhere near it, you know. But Brian Brolly did finally persuade me. He said, I think you've got to do it. It's a wonderful piece of writing. It doesn't depend on it being Michael doing it. And I was persuaded by that, and I was directed beautifully by Patrick Garland in it. And I discovered that, exactly right, that the work is extremely well constructed, I'm sure, between Hilton and Michael, and I then did begin. Found that I was perfectly able to do it without Michael's cadences in my ear at all. I was able to do it to find the cadences of the writing rather than of the actor who had created it. And I discovered then the joy of, I'm scarcely a Shanachi myself, but I have certainly connected to this idea of storytelling in the theatre, and in innumerable, I mean, something like 8 or 10 one-person plays. I have absolutely I'm carrying the torch for Michael and what he.
Simon, you say in your book that Michael was not a model for you, but a token of the richness and the ripeness that is absent from the stage today.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to ask you, somebody of the type of actor that and person that Mac Liammóir was, and as we said earlier on, you know, that he's throwback to that era of Beerbohm Tree and Helen Terry and Irving, etc., and Sarah Bernhardt, that how would his work and his creativity, what would it have to offer to the stage today? Is it gone? You know, is it and lo, with a little rod that he touched the honey of romance? Is it gone? That type of acting and creativity.
Well, I can't say I can think of anybody that reminds me of Micheál Mac Liammóir at this moment in time. There are people who do very interesting one-person shows, but this extraordinary thing that, of course, I also know I must be talking to my friends and so on, and talking about Yeats, all of those other shows which we have on disc, fortunately. Again, I have this sense of Michael as a conduit for, in this case, Irish history, a great poet, a great life in the case of Oscar Wilde's. Michael, to use a modern phrase, channeled these things in a way that is truly, well, I'm forced to use the phrase again, magical. It's a spellbinding thing that he did. And nobody's very interested in doing that anymore. I am very interested in doing that. I've got this crazy idea that I hope Michael would smile on, or maybe he'd mock me for it, to do a one-man show about Balzac, to try to create that teeming world of Balzac within one person. It's the, you know, it's the it's the storyteller of the tribe. That's what there was about Michael, and that's why. But the bizarre fact that he became the spokesperson for a culture which was actually not his own, but which he had absorbed into himself, is a completely unprecedented phenomenon. And that gives a certain thrill to it, because he was performing the thing that he had chosen to become.
Yes, there was a great, I would think, Simon, there was a great, or is a great truth in that. Instead of what people said, a lie, there is a great truth in his desire to become Micheál Mac Liammóir, and a lifelong commitment which cannot be denied.
Yeah, that's right. It is. And I said rather lightly in a piece that I wrote for radio about him, that he changed his name in the same way that a nun does when she takes the veil. Mm-hmm. It was sacerdotal. He'd anointed himself as Micheál Mac Liammóir. I mean, I keep saying Michael because that's how Hilton called him Michael, and he even called himself Michael. But he's really Micheál Mac Liammóir is correct. He, as I say, anointed himself as the servant of this beautiful culture which he had fallen in love with. I mean, we have to be astonished all over again that he wrote, as far as I'm aware, the first modern play in Irish. I think Diarmaid and Grania is his. That's
in Galway.
The first person,
yeah. And as we're drawing towards a close, Simon, and I'm talking to you from Connemara, which I know was a special place to Mac Liammóir. He came down to Carna to again out the road for a year to perfect his Irish. He was very friendly with the Galway writer Pádraig O'Conora, and he journeyed to Roundstone, again out the road, to visit his great friend, the writer Kate O'Brien, in the 1950s. Spent many time here, including on the back of a motorbike with the Irish actor Peadar Lamb, spinning around Connemara, where his toupee ended up in one of the fields. So we know that he came here and that it was a special place. And again, that serendipitous connection with Orson Welles coming here as well.
Yeah.
Out of the trio, Simon, Callow, the only one that we haven't had to Clifden and to the Clifden Arts Festival or to connect with us on this great topic is Simon Callow. And we know, Simon, that in the future, and the very near future, hopefully, that you'll be here in person in this special place for both Wilde, of course, the connection with Connemara, Orson Welles, and who the subject of our talk here today, Micheál Mac Liammóir. Simon, to sum up the man and to sum up your deep connection and your obvious love, Simon, your great, deep love of the man, how would you sum up your relationship with him and your ongoing relationship and love, and also your promotion, your keeping this man alive to an international audience, where he could have been forgotten?
Yeah, that I do feel that very strongly, because, as we've just said, apart from the recordings, Michael wasn't essentially a film actor, so we don't really know his work in that sense. It can only be through people like me who saw him and who knew him that he will live in the same way that, thank God, Harold Pinter wrote his wonderful book about McMaster. Mac is just absolute masterpiece. That little slim volume is fantastic. And this is how we will keep these actors alive. Actors who were fundamentally of the theatrical, that's who they were and what they were. But my relationship to him is very curious. I do feel as if in some sort of way I experienced some sort of apprenticeship in that brief week that I knew him. And you know that I did, when I finished my drama training, I wrote to him first. I said, Mr. Mac Liammóir, you won't remember me, but here's a photograph of me. And it would be, knowing you was a transformative thing, and I would love more than anything else to have my first job in the professional theatre at the gate, if that were possible. And he wrote back and he said, you're absolutely right. I don't remember you at all. He said, I do. He said, what a wonderful photograph. But he said, you must come and audition for us, of course. But when I did come, it was Hilton who saw me. And I thought the audition went frightfully well, but I just never heard from them again. So that was the end of my actual connection to them. But oddly enough, I then became a very close friend of Lady Rossmore, Valerie Rossmore, who was Brian Nolan's, did I call him Tobin? I'm sorry, Brian Nolan. Brian Tobin's daughter. And so we also keep the flame going. She had such an intimate relationship with them, partly brought up by Michael and Hilton at Harcourt Terrace. And so that's another way that one
well, you carry around a piece of Micheál Mac Liammóir with you every day on your hand. Can you show us?
My ring has been stolen. Isn't that a terrible?
Simon.
3 months ago, it was stolen from a gymnasium where I was training, I actually let Valerie have the ring for a little while to make a copy of it.
Oh, good, yeah.
So I'll make a copy of her copy, which is not quite the same thing. But yes, that was Pat McClarnon who gave that to me. When I went to see Pat in his flat in wherever it is, right in the centre of Dublin, almost the centre of Dublin, Baggots Lane. He said, I'll talk to you about Michael, but he said, first there's something I have to do. And he rummaged in this drawer and he pulled out the ring, which I knew so well from Michael and from photographs. It always, Michael always liked to show it off. And he put it on and it fitted my finger, which rings almost never do. So it was like Cinderella in a way. I did feel that I'd been connected again with Michael in a very, very particular way. But
yeah, well, you have that connection, a deep, deep connection, which goes further than any object. Simon Callow, this was a marvelous conversation, and it is a conversation, paying tribute to a man whose legacy must carry on, and it is through people like you that do it with such love, tenderness, and admiration, and it inspires us to carry on as well. And we're honoured in Connemara, in the special place, to have you talk to us today for the Clifden Arts Festival about Micheál Mac Liammóir. Simon Callow, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.